Hi, good evening, everyone. Am I good to start? Okay, it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Reshaping of New England Seasons. What's happening to our weather? My name is Sarah Ryder. I'm the Associate Vice President of Ocean Conservation Practice here at the New England Aquarium. In addition to our co-sponsor, the Boston Globe, this New England Aquarium Lecture Series event is also made possible with generous support from the Lowell Institute, which allows the aquarium to offer its lecture series free of charge. It's also a pleasure to welcome our virtual viewers tonight. The aquarium is a nonprofit conservation organization that has protected and cared for our ocean and marine animals for more than 55 years. As we all know, a habitable planet needs a healthy ocean. At the aquarium, we aim to inspire everyone to form a deeper connection to the ocean and to take action to protect it. Our building is just one way that we do that. Our exhibits and educational experiences promote discovery and instill a sense of wonder about ocean animals and habitats. Another way we protect the ocean is through scientific research we conduct in our Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life, the aquarium's dedicated research arm. Tonight's conversation is very meaningful to me on many levels. I graduated from the United States Naval Academy with a degree in oceanography and went on to serve in the United States Air Force as a meteorologist. My squadron supported weather operations for 88 military installations west of the Mississippi. We had weather systems coming off the Rockies, we had a third of Tornado Alley, and we also supported rescue operations in the aftermath of Katrina and Rita. This instilled in me a deep sense of responsibility to people and communities when it comes to understanding what's happening with our weather. So now I chase ocean solutions, not storms, here at the aquarium, where we have a waterfront location on Boston's Central Wharf that gives us a firsthand look at the impacts of climate change. We're seeing rising sea levels, increased flooding, and more extreme weather events. We have just the right group tonight to discuss how we approach these challenges. Our panel moderator this evening is Ken Mahan, lead meteorologist at the Boston Globe. Ken has served as a meteorologist and weather producer for several national and local networks, most recently for the climate unit at NBC News. He's also worked for local TV news outlets throughout the country, including stops in Alaska, Wisconsin, and Massachusetts. Originally from Worcester, Ken holds degrees from Assumption University and Mississippi State University. It is my pleasure to welcome Ken, who will introduce tonight's panelists.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. I have no idea how I'm going to follow up being a good meteorologist knowing your time in the military, so that's quite the feat. I really appreciate the kind words. It feels like Alaska here tonight. I know everyone battling the snow, the cold, coming into here for this evening, and I'm really excited to be able to discuss weather and climate with my fellow panelists and talk some shop with you all. Let's begin with introducing Judah Cohen, research scientist at MIT. If you want to come on down and join me, that'd be fantastic. Thank you, Judah. Secondly, Sabrina Shankman, climate reporter at the Boston Globe. Thank you, Sabrina. And then finally, Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux, distinguished professor at the University of Vermont and Vermont State climatologist. Thank you so much. Now, before we begin, did anybody find a large roll of $100 bills wrapped in a rubber band? Because I found the rubber band. I appreciate everybody coming down again to the New England Aquarium. Thank you once again. And we're going to get right into it. It's weather and climate. It's a hot topic. And there's been already so many submissions with your questions from folks at home, and can't wait to get into it. So thank you all for joining, and we'll dive right into the first question. And I'll lead this off with Judah. New England's identity is deeply tied to the 4 seasons, but our seasons are changing in length and in character. What particular season stands out to you that has seen the most significant change in recent years?
Yeah, so thank you, Ken. Well, fall is the season that's warming the fastest, and next is summer. So I think many of us expect in New England, as after August, we start to see those cool, crisp mornings at least, and that seems to have become less and less frequent. I like to say September is no longer a fall month, but really a summer month. So to me, that's certainly a very noticeable change. Summers have gotten longer. So a lot, especially humidity. So the high temperatures, surprisingly, here in the Boston area haven't gone up as much, but the nighttime lows have stayed higher because of the more moisture, and that's the part that's most dangerous. With spring, I remember when I first moved here, April was the cruelest month. We had this, April gloom, whatever they call that. I'm not from New England originally, but you would want, you knew winter was over. You were eager for spring to get going, and it didn't happen because of the fog and drizzle. Now it seems like we have real springs. Spring is coming earlier and more aggressively. My specialty is winter. I'm happy to maybe talk about that later.
Sure.
So I'll leave it at that.
Leslie Ann, Vermont's climatologist, how about you? Any season in particular that stands out?
Well, I'm going to do like Judah did, and he mentioned all of them, right? So for me, it's actually all of the above,
Sure.
right? And I think in spring, what we're seeing is more and more what we call backward seasons, where, it starts to warm up, and then the temperature actually shifts back to colder, right? And you see things like snow on Mother's Day, and everybody's like, what's going on? So we're seeing a few more of those. So spring would be the one that sort of comes to mind a lot for me. And then in winter, we're seeing a lot of this whiplash between the cold and the warm, and getting flooding at the end of December and so on. So winter's going to be up there. And then just like Judah, I think fall is also critically important to look at because the changes in the foliage that we're seeing, right? And those muted colors, and whether it comes at all, and whether you came up in October when you should have come up in September because it was accelerated, all of those things.
Yeah, it was a difficult time trying to forecast fall foliage over the last 3 seasons. Missed the mark a couple times, but for the most part, shorted and muted. Sabrina, you've been obviously with the Globe for 5 years and some. And for you, have you found yourself sort of focusing on one season over another?
Yeah, so I'm from New England. I grew up in Maine. I live in Maine. The changes are impossible to miss, right? But as a climate change reporter specifically, I'm looking most often at the intersection between what's happening in the world around us and how that translates to people's lives, specifically around this concept of a climate emergency, right? Where are there new dangers and new hazards? And of course, most urgently, we see that in the summer. In the summer is where I am most often. I started at the Globe in May. I wrote my first Boston heat wave story that May because they were starting earlier, they were lasting longer, right? This idea of an extended summer, and also, that seems to be when we're telling stories too of extreme flooding events, of drought, right? It's sort of like the chicken soup of catastrophe in some ways, depending on the year. So that really is, to me, where I feel like my job translates from, telling these longer term stories that I'm working and I've got cooking for some time to every day being like, oh my gosh, there's an emergency that I have to write about.
Right. Yeah. And for me, real quickly, I love the beauty of extreme weather, not so much the impacts. And summer, seeing more extreme, intense systems coming in, tornadoes, unfortunately, becoming more popular in the New England region, especially over this last summer, unfortunately, with the outbreak in September. But yeah, I appreciate all of your answers. Going back to fall foliage, I love fall foliage, but like I mentioned, we've seen a muted fall foliage over the last 3 years. In your opinion, I'll start with you, Leslie Ann. What seasonal changes or maybe severe weather events have you personally noticed change or enhance over recent years? And is there an extreme weather or climate change hazard that you would consider new to our region?
So I think if you think about it from the northern New England perspective, and knowing that there is both climate variability and change, I think the increase in variability is one piece.
Sure.
And what we're seeing is droughts becoming more understood, that we need to pay attention to droughts. It's important to look at floods, but we cannot forget that there are droughts also part of the New England story. And I think when you look at droughts and you look at how they evolve and the timing of them, that's what helps us to understand that the phenology of it, the timing of the onset of the drought is what eventually leads to those muted colors, right? Because the phenology has been accelerated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And I sort of jumped to this because we're on the topic. Drought sort of seems like it's a summer problem, but it actually expands beyond just the summer, right? I'll kind of ask you, Judah, as far as drought, what impacts can drought cause throughout the other seasons? Are there any certain ramifications of extreme drought in fall, winter, or spring?
Yeah, so drought's not my expertise, but I've dabbled in it a little bit. But yeah, I think any season can start out dry. Certainly, if you have less snow in the winter, that would mean drier soils in the spring, maybe then less rain, and so a lot of these droughts that we really officially hit in summer have their beginnings in the winter. It's very important to get that snowfall that really helps to kind of percolate through the soils and saturate the soils. It also seems to me, we're getting these brush fires more often in every season now. I mean, even like in winter, who thought you have to worry about brush fires in New England in the winter, but I think we had maybe last year or 2 years ago. So so that and again, not my expertise. I do think when you have drought, the vegetation is more susceptible to pests and other diseases. So I do want to piggyback what Leslie said and had said about variability, but yeah, I think of the weather as becoming much more volatile. So I don't know. We talked about drought
with the handoff.
Am I back?
There we go. We're back.
Yeah. Okay. With the drought, but also New England, the Northeast, but certainly New England is seeing the greatest increase in these heavy or intense precipitation events. So we have, again, this theme of volatility, I think, with what we're seeing with climate change, increasing droughts, but also increasing flooding and heavy rains.
That's a good point. It actually reminds me, Sabrina, of a story that you wrote with the Vermont flooding 2 years ago, or ish years ago at this point. Have you seen more flooding exasperated with drought within your own reporting?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the floods have been amazing, just in terms of their intensity that we've seen with these extreme rainfall events where, it seems like a regular heavy rainstorm is predicted, but suddenly there are these localized impacts where there might be a significant number of inches that fall suddenly, inundating communities, threatening dams, sometimes breaking dams or overtopping them. We've written a lot about that. I think just going back to the drought, there are also some ramifications that we don't think about as much. I wrote a story several years ago now about, it was a summer when we were having a drought in the Boston area, and the groundwater levels were low. Now, the problem, maybe everyone's aware of this, but the problem with that is that much of the city of Boston is built on fill, right? Years ago, the founders of Boston were like, this isn't big enough. We're gonna really beef it up, right? So they put a lot of fill in. They built this incredible city. But to keep the buildings steady on the fill, they had to put wooden pilings under them. Now, these pilings, despite being wood buried in water, can last for hundreds of years until you expose it to air. So when the groundwater level goes down, as it can in periods of drought, all of a sudden, the foundation that buildings are sitting on can start to rot. And that is a case that we have seen in some places in Boston where there is some expensive fixes that have to happen as a result of that. And so that is like a very pressing need here because it's not a small number of buildings, and some of the most important historical buildings in particular in Boston that face risks as a result of this, which I was just like, I was surprised when I learned about that. Like, how, first off, you don't think about drought as a New
Sure.
England problem if you're just walking around hanging out normally. If you all know this stuff a lot better than most people, and I think I'm sort of a proxy for, the normal mortal being who does not have a PhD in climate science or whatever, geography maybe. So we don't think about that. But then to think, okay, this shows up in shaking the very foundation of these buildings, I don't know, that just brings it home in this really kind of visceral way for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? Not only does, our property become most vulnerable to drought, and then the flip side of the coin with extreme extreme rainfall events, I think of drought with the soil becoming less porous. And so whenever it does rain, the water actually just repels off the soil rather than actually percolate down into the ground. So our rainfall, whether it's an inch from a meteorological standpoint, whether it's an inch in the forecast, it really feels more like double or triple the amount, especially, I always think of Vermont with you, Leslie Ann, with the varying terrain across New England, even dipping down into the Berkshires and even the coastal plain at times. So drought has a very, substantial impact, and we unfortunately are seeing it more and more in the last couple of decades. So, Leslie Ann, I'll start with you. How do we differentiate between historically volatile weather in New England from climate change? We've always had big storms, cold, heat. Where lies the cutoff between normal weather and climate change? Is there a particular link?
So great question, Ken. And I think part of it has to do with understanding the drivers and the way in which our changing climate kind of plays out. And one of the things that we don't always remember when our climate changes is that the storm tracks actually change, right? And so if you look at it, who's a winner, who's a loser in terms of precipitation? What are the characteristics of some of these hazards that we're seeing that are actually changing? And then how can we kind of quantify that from a numerical perspective, from a statistical perspective?
Sure.
And I think too, because we know something about the past and we can't always use that to predict the future, we have this continuum of knowledge that we need to always bring to the table. So that if we go back to drought for one sec, I actually love doing droughts because when you look at New England droughts, somebody said to me once, oh, we're going to see droughts like we've never seen before in New England. And I was like, okay, so what does that look like?
Right.
And so I started going back through diaries and written journals and records and old photographs. And the piece about the wildfires, when we see wildfires actually burning out of control for like 4 years, and we're talking about wetlands burning out of control, that's how bad droughts have been in the past, right? And so we do have some markers that help us to understand, are we getting close to that? Are we still a little bit of ways? And so it becomes this nice web of putting everything together to then answer that question, what are those markers that we can pinpoint?
Sure. No, that's very well put. And Judah, from your perspective, is there anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult, important question, but very difficult. And I think maybe it's the one thought or a question that gets climatologists fighting with each other more than anything else. Is this event really, how much can you attribute to climate change? Has it emerged above the noise? Can we really see the signal? I think it's very difficult to disentangle the two. The only way I see forward is really with climate models, where you can get much more data than we can get from the observations. The problem is is this event really truly climate change driven or not? You need a lot of data, and the models can provide. I mean, the models have their own flaws. So this is a very difficult thing. Sometimes we break records by a lot. Usually records are broken by a very small margin. So I think we can have more confidence if something happens that really is much greater than, if we got like a 4-foot snowstorm here in Boston, right? I think that would be, certainly climate change contributed to that. But it's very difficult, but very important.
Sabrina, from your perspective, I know you've covered climate change basically since you came onto the globe. Anything that you want to add?
And long before that.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I think just to sort of elaborate and offer a little additional explanation to what Judah's talking about here. What the models allow you to do is to take a specific event and look at it and say, okay, if this were to happen without the amount of greenhouse gases that we have pumped into the atmosphere, what would the storm look like, right? And so there are these sort of famous examples like Hurricane Harvey, that was such a terrible storm in Texas in particular, dumped so much water, had so many, horrific impacts. The heat dome along the Pacific Northwest from several years ago, which also similarly huge human toll, huge animal toll. It was horrible. In those two cases in particular, I think there were some pretty clear markers to say climate change is really tipping the scales and making this more likely to have happened. We were actually emailing today because, there was it's called rapid attribution studies, right? So this is like emerging kind of newer field of climate science where experts are trying to say very quickly, was this incident caused or made worse by climate change? And so there was some folks who were trying to look at this most recent snow event and extreme cold that we've had. I think as with any emerging field in science, there's probably like some better, some worse examples of how that's interpreted, right?
You brought two great. It's not working. Right? You brought two great examples. That heat wave in the Pacific Northwest. That's the one I think every climate scientist points to. Yeah, we could see the signal there of climate change, and Harvey as well, with the amount of rainfall.
Well, I think just from a meteorological perspective, for each degree the atmosphere warms, it could hold 4% more water vapor, right? And generally, from the bird's eye view, yes, of course, we are having a colder than average winter this time around, but it's the first time since the winter of 2014, 2015. So it's been 11 years. But the atmosphere, generally as a whole, is warming, and that water vapor increase just makes the extreme, the volatility of storms that we have been talking about, whether it's drought, whether it's hurricanes, whether it's flooding events, just that much more grander. And these extreme events are impeding on areas of the country that aren't really used to that, right? We've seen, I think of, what was it? I believe it was Milton, or no, it was Helene that pushed into the Carolinas, right? And dumped astronomical rainfall over an area that just isn't used to it. And we saw catastrophic, billion-dollar damage within that area. And that's just one example where the United States has been averaging, over $20 billion weather disasters in the last 5 years. And that's been tripling what was used to be the average of, 7. So
can I just jump on that? Because I think the one of the important points from a human impact side of that is that there have been studies that have shown that when there is an extreme heat event in a place like New England compared to an extreme heat event in, say, Memphis, right? The what they see in hospitals is significantly different, right? Because we do not have the infrastructure set up to support people through those kinds of events, whereas in the South, in places where it is more like historically normal to experience those things, they do. It seems obvious, but that it's amazing. Like when I talk, sometimes in events like that, I'll talk to emergency room physicians about like, what are you seeing? And I mean, they can really just be inundated with people who are in bad shape.
Can I just piggyback on that?
yeah, Leslie Ann.
Everybody's piggybacking right now.
This is
So
great.
I'm-
It's like
I'm
we're a
gonna-
good team. It's like the
We are.
Patriots.
So I'm going to piggyback on what Sabrina just said, because the other thing about New England is that physiologically, our bodies are not as acclimated to whether it's the extreme moisture at night, right? Whether it's the extreme temperatures in the day. And so the reaction that we have, the unfortunate mortality that results, is also due to that. And so then it becomes a public awareness challenge to make sure that folks understand that, yes, you're not used to getting these type of warnings, and here's what you need to think about and do, even if you've never had to do it before, right? So there's that piece in there. And then the other piece I want to piggyback on what you were saying just now, Ken, is a lot of the changes we always think about in terms of temperature and precipitation or moisture, but we also have to remember that there are changes in atmospheric circulation and the change in the jet stream that we're seeing, and part of that's what we see those cold events like further south, where they're not used to seeing those cold events, and they might only have one plow per county, right? And so it's a multiple challenge in different directions that we need to sort of just raise the level of awareness of why we're talking about some of these things.
Judah.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It works.
I got really excited. Yeah, I was used to not working here. So hope everybody's ears are okay. No, but what Ken said, remind me about the hurricanes. One thing that I find really compelling, that I think there is a climate change signal, is the rapid deepening of hurricanes. It used to be, we have the Saffir-Simpson scale, and there's 1 through 5, 5 being the strongest. It used to be kind of be a nice distribution among the numbers. Now it seems to go right from 1 to 5.
Yeah.
And that, again, not my expertise, but certainly as a climate scientist, I feel like it's very compelling that how quickly these hurricanes intensify is really mind-boggling. I mean, Boston is thought of as like a place vulnerable to hurricanes. We haven't had really one too bad. Was it Hurricane Bob, maybe the last one?
Yeah, Hurricane Bob 91, everything. Yep.
But I mean, that is an area, it's like a ticking time bomb. We've been lucky, but it lasts for so long. And the fact that these hurricanes can intensify so rapidly seems to be a consequence of climate change. The oceans have been really warming. Something we haven't heard about before is these maritime heat waves. No one ever talked about them only within the recent years. And they certainly seem to be giving fuel to the hurricanes.
Yeah, and it seems like the Gulf of Maine is warming at a faster rate than many other water bodies across the globe, right? Am I mistaken in that?
You're dead right.
99% of the bodies of water on the planet.
Yeah, wow. Well, speaking of this winter, like I just touched on it, this one in particular is running colder than average, but winter is traditionally, the marker for New England. It's how New Englanders basically define their identity in terms of weather. But we are seeing winter trend overall warmer and shorter. How have you seen these changes impact our region? Sabrina, I'll start with you, actually.
Oh my gosh, I wrote the saddest story last year. The city of Boston had called a snow day because there was a big storm coming. And I was given the job of trying to, provide some sort of color to what was happening. The storm did not come, or it did, but it came a couple degrees warmer than planned. It came as rain.
Ooh.
The kids were home. The headline was, "I wanted to go sledding."
Oh.
I spent the day interviewing sad children.
Oh my God.
About the snow day that they almost got to experience. It was, but there could not be a clear manifestation of that, right? Like, because I'm also have been writing about studies that are coming out that are showing that Southern New England in particular has lost so many days of snow cover. It's like a month fewer now compared to like 20 years ago. That is a mind-boggling change in the way that we in New England experience winter. I'm in northern New England, as are you. We get our snow.
That we do.
We get a little bit less. We get it in variable ways. We get snow, rain, snow, but we still get it. But here in southern New England, that is a dramatic shift. And so I feel like those kids, I do feel pretty happy for what they got to experience this week, at least, that's good for them.
I just want to be clear. I was not the meteorologist that forecast that storm. That was before my time at the Globe.
It's true.
Throwing under the bus here.
Okay, so let's jump on to this next one here. I know that we talked about precipitation events, drought, extreme warmth, shortening winters, etc. But I want to know from your perspective, and Judah, I'll start with you here, but what will New England's day-to-day weather look like maybe 5, 10, 20 years from now?
I just want to ask, are we getting back to winter? That's my passion and what I study.
We can start with winter since we're in the winter zone.
Okay. I don't know that it'll be unrecognizable to us. I don't think that'll be the case. Again, I think the weather will become more volatile. So I like to say climate change is not an equal opportunity employer or phenomenon. It doesn't spread out equally, but the rich get richer and the poorer get poorer. So if you're in a drought, you'll be in a longer drought. If you're getting heavy rains, you'll get heavier rains. Maybe you'll be in a longer period of heat and moisture, humidity, high humidity. And the same with winter. I don't think, my take is definitely, I think, very different than most climate scientists, maybe than the panel here. People write, on social media are always commenting how we're not going to see, the snow. We don't have the snow like we used to. And I try to remind everyone, we just lived through the golden age of nor'easters. And we just had the top 10 snowstorm this past weekend. And if people notice that there are people putting out their top 10 lists, and 7 of the 10 top, the biggest snowstorms, 7 of the top 10 happened in the past 30 years. And the same thing for Blue Hill, which has the longest climate record in the entire United States. So, I think winter, it's not just about getting warmer and shorter, but that is happening to some degree. But I also think, again, I don't know if we want to introduce the polar vortex here, but
Bring it in.
it's certainly being used more. That and bomb cyclones is certainly getting more and more play in the media. But I do think that the way climate change is happening, and let's just say it's disrupting the polar vortex, I'll try to keep it very simple, and severe winter weather increases. And obviously this winter has been a really great example of that. The polar vortex tends to be just kind of stable and circular, and that keeps all the cold air locked over the Arctic regions. It's centered over the North Pole. But when it becomes disturbed and disrupted and kind of becomes more distorted in its circulation, then we get cold air outbreaks further south. And this winter, certainly the polar vortex has been doing plenty of tap dancing, and with that, we've gotten these repeated cold air outbreaks. And I don't know about for Boston, but I know for New York City, a bunch of meteorologists are saying New York City could have their longest stretch. I don't know if it'll do it, but still, that even the fact that it's possible, have the longest stretch of below freezing days, right, going back. So I don't think winter, kind of the reports of my demise and premature. I do think people are writing off winter too quickly. I think they'll be much more volatile. So when we have years of no snow or multiple years of no snow like we had the past 3, I think that will become more common. But I think also years where we have blockbuster snowstorms, maybe multiple of them in one year, also might start to increase.
No, I was looking at, thank you, Judah. I was looking at the forecast for this weekend, and it's going to be 19 degrees in Tallahassee, Florida on Sunday morning. So go even more south.
Yeah, and last year, you talk about Tallahassee, but last year, first of all, talking about ocean effect snow in the east coast of Florida. Okay, but last year we had this incredible event in the Gulf. I mean, we're talking about, but where they basically had this kind of ocean effect snow coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. Unprecedented snow. So winter is, I think, is a very, very interesting month, and it's not simple to understand or to kind of box in what to expect.
Thank you, Judah. Leslie Ann, for you, 5, 10, 20 years from now,
So
what do you think?
I think the big word is nuance. And I think when we talk about trends and we talk about either increases or staying the same or whatever, it sort of does it a disservice because it sort of hides the fluctuations, the volatility, the variability, all of the things that are still going on, that will still be going on. And I think not everybody has had the opportunity and the privilege to learn about this, to go to school for this. And so it behooves us to actually share that. And so that's what I do whenever I go give a talk as state climatologist, try to bring all of those pieces in a culturally appropriate manner. And I think that's part of what we still need to sort of keep in mind and share. And I think having the size of this audience here tonight is just a reflection of the fact that everybody wants to know about this. And so it's up to us to share what we know.
Yeah, that's a great segue into the next sort of question I have. I will give everyone a 5-minute warning. If you do have any questions for the panelists, you could scan that QR code to the top right. This is much bigger than the green screen I'm used to, by the way. So that's a big, up there. Perfect.
Wait, can I quickly,
of
quickly
course.
answer that one? Sorry, because I think this is a sort of a visceral way to understand 20 years from now.
Right.
There's been some research that was done. I think it was at Climate Central or somebody I forget who put it out. But what they did is you could put in a zip code and say, what will my climate resemble? What city will my climates resemble, in 2050? And it was based on different climate scenarios, because when we're looking out into the future, we still have some control, right? There's still this question of, if the world does everything that it can possibly do to address the climate crisis, it's a different outcome than if we just say whatever, right? So for Boston, 2050, what research was finding, our climate resembled Baltimore's. That's the best case scenario. If we don't do anything, if we burn all the fossil fuels, it was Memphis, which is why I mentioned Memphis before. So that, I mean, if you've been to Memphis, if you know anything about Memphis, that's pretty different from Boston, right? Especially in winter. And this is a very overly simplified concept, of course, which is not taking all the variability into account, but it is at least one way to look at it.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think of what sort of invasive species live down in Baltimore, Memphis that we're not used to up here, and what's tracking north. And I actually think we'll dive into that in one of the questions that was submitted from our audience. But no matter what happens, hopefully, if we feel like Baltimore, we don't have the Baltimore sports. It remains the Patriots and the Red Sox, Bruins, and Celtics. All right. So, Leslie Ann, what efforts are being made to adapt to our new seasons? How should communities and businesses rethink seasonal preparedness when traditional markers are becoming less predictable?
So a lot of communities at various scales are engaging what's called climate action, which means looking at adaptation as well as mitigation on the local scale, whether it's a town scale. And when I think about some place like Vermont, towns can actually be 6 people, right? So it's a very different way of thinking about how do you work through and prepare for our changing climate when you have a town of 6 versus a town of 6,000. So that's one piece that we need to look at. The other thing that I think is also important is working and walking alongside indigenous knowledges and braiding the knowledges that we might have as folks who live in the West with indigenous ways of knowing. And I think there's some actually beautiful examples of when that occurs, and the richness that comes out when you see the stories with the science and sort of new understandings that emerge as a result.
Sabrina, anything you want to add, or?
Well, I mean, here in Massachusetts, we have the Municipal Vulnerability Program, which I think it's either 99% or 100% of communities in Massachusetts are involved in. And this is like targeted funding for the specific adaptation needs of a community, those that are teeny tiny and rural to Boston, Worcester, wherever it may be. It's been a super successful program, and it's helping tackle things like making bigger culverts, creating seawalls, like whatever the project might be that's very tailored to a specific location. So I think that's an example of where state and local governments have worked together in these really creative ways for the state not to say, here, I'm going to prescribe what all the answers are, but to say, here's a pot of money, tell me what you need, apply for it, and then we'll help facilitate you doing this work. Sure. So that's, I think, a really, I love finding the examples of where communities are able to be active agents in kind of taking control of the situation to the extent that they're able, and I think this is a good one.
Perfect. Judah, anything that you want to add?
Yes, I mean, I'm not so much involved with policy,
Right.
But I do think I put a lot of effort into trying to educate the public as much as I can. I think, foreknowledge is forewarned is forearmed. And I do want to express that I think people need to prepare for volatility. I don't think so much of climate change is just a shift to the right, let's say to warmer temperatures, that way. But I think a good example is, Texas, they had this February 2021 very difficult freeze and snowstorm, and they really didn't count on extreme cold. And they said, okay, that's something we don't need to worry about, and didn't build the resiliency or the redundancy for it. So yeah, I think volatility is going to be the biggest issue that I think our society is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, and from my perspective, just staying plugged in, right, with local agencies, with your local wherever you find your news source and everything. Hopefully, the Boston Globe, and essentially, just staying aware and recognizing, that yes, our climate is evolving, our seasons are changing, and for better or for worse, it doesn't look great, but probably leaning towards the worst side. It's going to become more volatile, like each person here just mentioned. So that's it. Look, this has been a very fast-paced, extremely potent question. I really appreciate it. Now we turn to you all and everyone streaming at home. Raise your hands if you have any questions at all. We have some mic runners, and we could go ahead and answer any questions you might have. But I have also received a slew of questions from folks tuning in virtually, and we're going to get into the Q&A. This is where I asked where, it's a lightning round, and I'm a meteorologist, and I wanted crashing sounds and all that stuff, but they said no. Sabrina, I'll start with you. And I'll try to keep this as quickly as possible. We want to get as many questions in. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hands. We have mic runners on each side. I'll get to you right after we kick things off with Sabrina. As a reporter, what are the most interesting stories for you to cover that are coming out of our continually changing climate here in New England? What has gotten you most excited?
Well, I kind of gave it away a little bit with what I just was talking about. I think as I say this as a climate change reporter, I think that people can be really overwhelmed by the scope of climate change. And I think the more that we can tell stories of agency in the face of this changing climate, we know the climate is changing. We know that it will keep changing. We also know that there are people in every community who are tackling this challenge in innovative and scrappy ways, and that are not kind of passive victims of change, but are agents of kind of almost like fighting for their survival in some ways, right? And so I think elevating those voices and helping people see those examples can help inspire change in other places too. So those are the stories that really kind of get me going, that I get excited about.
Thank you so much. Okay, let me scan to the audience. Even with glasses, I can't really see that well. Okay, let's start over on this side with, I think you're wearing a red or pink sweater. Yes. We're going to bring a microphone to you in record speed, but safely.
Thank you. My question is short and sweet, and it's about wind. If anybody could speak to whether there's changes in the average wind speeds. It seems like it's getting windier to me here in Boston, but that's very anecdotal, so I'm very curious. Thank you.
Judah?
Okay, I only know of one station here in Boston that has been recording wind and has a very strong trend. It's actually a decreasing trend, and that's at Blue Hill, and that's because they let the trees grow back. So that's the only data point I have. I don't think there's been a big change in wind as far as I know. Obviously not obviously to me, not to you, but it has to do with the change in pressure. I don't think there's been much change in pressure. I don't think high pressures are getting higher and low pressures necessarily getting lower, but that's more of a debate. So I don't think there's been a big change in wind, but the only data point I know that I can pull up is less wind at Blue Hill.
I'll add on to that, Judah. So in short, Blue Hill, absolutely correct. There's not a whole lot of change inland away from the coast. Boston's Logan Airport, however, has seen the windiest year on record since the airport opened, with an average wind gust of over 30 miles per hour. And then I got curious and looked at Portland, same thing. Looked at some of the Cape Cod airports, same thing. But it's interesting. 2 miles inland.
But that's just 1 year, though.
Correct. Yes. For this year, it's been the windiest on record. But overall, it's sort of been average. But this year for sure has been windier. Leslie Ann.
That reminded me of one point I was going to make a little bit earlier on. When we think about New England, it's not this monolith. It's inland versus coastal. It's upland versus lowland. And all of those pieces, the context is always important. So the person who asked the question, are you seeing that in like the middle of the city itself, where you've got what we call urban canyons, or are you seeing that along, just walking along the coast? So the way that you find it is going to be part to answering how it kind of plays out too.
Good point. Let's go with the front left side, my left side, with the hat. We'll bring you a microphone.
Thanks so much for doing this. I love the illustration of Boston becoming Baltimore if we take action, and it becoming Nashville if we don't. Can you share other such examples that really help to bring home, at least for those of us that have traveled to those cities, looking for other illustrations? Then I had a two-part. I submitted the other question about the impact of the reduced snowpack on our rivers and that type of thing.
Yeah, and maybe to your point with like the ski and snow sport industry too, with the overall reduced snowpack as well. Leslie Ann or Sabrina, anybody want to jump in with that?
Well, I'll just, since it's about snowpack, when I talk about the poor get poorer and the rich get richer, and we've had the cold and snow. The Western U.S. though is having a record snow drought, and they're really suffering with their ski industry. And then, I mean, they really depend on the snow for their water supply, so it could get worse for them. But yeah, that's all I guess I want to say. That is definitely, the snowpack is a problem.
Leslie Ann.
So this is that inland versus coastal, inland versus rural piece going on. And when I think about snowpack coming from Vermont, and knowing that a lot of folks who don't live in a major metropolitan city actually depend on wells for their water, and looking at the last year, 2 years worth of drought, and knowing that a lot of those wells have not come back as yet, that for me is where the amount of that fell is critically important, because even with all the snow that we're getting right now, we're still seeing record low groundwater levels. And so that's another piece of that puzzle, why we need to kind of understand not just what is falling, but what we're doing as humans in terms of using those resources as well.
Well, in Maine too, where I live, I think we are very much on the edge of a crisis. Like when it comes to be spring, if there is not a sufficient snowmelt to restore, there are so many people who rely on private wells for their water source, and that it has been a severe drought there for quite some time. So I think hopefully the worst does not play out, but if it does, I do think that's the story I'm going to be writing this spring quite a bit. To your other question, when I was writing that story, we wanted to find examples for like, okay, so what? Like, what does that mean, right? So it was summertime, and it was very hot in Boston. And so I reached out to summer camp directors and like EMS providers, emergency service providers, cities who are putting out information in Boston, in Baltimore, in Memphis, to look at like, what are the things that you have to do? And what was interesting was just to see that, in Memphis in particular and Baltimore, there are certain precautions that are just built into the fabric of how they do events. So for like a July 4th event, for instance, there's going to be cooling tents, there's going to be misting stations, there's going to be ambulances on hand. Whereas in Boston, they're starting to do some of that stuff because they're needing to, because of examples of, heat exhaustion or whatever it may be. But it's not quite as routine, right? It's more of a new thing that they're getting used to, and it's not quite to the same extent. So I think there's just a lot of lessons that can be learned, because there's no real downside to taking those precautions now. And I think I know, because I talk to people from the city of Boston all the time. They're doing a lot of that thinking about like, okay, this is where we are now, and this is where we're likely going.
Thank you so much, everybody. Now let me see if there's any questions from the back. I see the far top, my top left, with the brown or black sweater. We will run you a microphone. And also, we will answer any questions that are submitted online with social media, with another article. So if we don't get to everyone tonight, so if you have questions at home or afterwards, you could go ahead and ask, and we will make sure that we get these covered in an article in the future. Go ahead, you have your microphone.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing about the science of climate change. So I'm a scientist and also a science communicator, and my question is about the science of climate communication, which shows that people are more likely to engage with solutions that resonate with hope and their identity and their values. And I'm curious, as a Globe reader, what the role of Boston Globe could be in informing people about how to explore those hopeful identity-based solutions.
Thank you for the question. Sabrina?
I was going to say that feels like a me one. You know, I think I was actually just talking with an editor about this today. I think that that represents a growth opportunity for us at the Boston Globe. I think there's a lot more we can be doing. You know, we're a small team. There are two of us on the climate team. I mean, Ken is doing the weather side of things. We have other people who pitch in, but there are two climate reporters at the Boston Globe, and one of them was only hired recently. So the unfortunate thing is that there is so much to write about on any given day. And in this, you know, last 12 months in particular, you can probably guess what kinds of stories have dominated my reporting. It starts with a T. So it's very hard when you're having to chase the news of climate change, when you're having to chase the news of offshore wind being decimated and clean energy being decimated and all of these funds being pulled back and scientists being laid off and science being gutted and satellites being taken, right? Like in that moment, that's the pressing news. But you're absolutely right. If the goal of science communication is ultimately to bring more people into the conversation, which is 100% my goal. I want everyone to feel like they can engage with this stuff. There has to be that tone of solution, and there has to be that tone of, you know, don't just need to bury your head in the sand. Like there is real hope here. There is a lot of work to be done. So I guess take this as me acknowledging that there's a lot of room for improvement there, but also know that it is on our radar as something we hope to do more of.
Leslie Ann?
I'm going to make a plug right now for, no. I'm going to make a plug for kudos for having this event and the partnership between the Globe and New England Aquarium. So kudos.
Thank
absolutely.
you, Leslie Ann. Thank you all. And just to quickly piggyback off of Sabrina, as meteorologist for the Boston Globe, my job is to not only forecast with great accuracy to make sure you all could, you know what you're wearing tomorrow morning, but it's also to give you the understanding and the science as to why are we getting to this forecast? How does that really impact you? And as we look at a larger scope, when we start shading into, you know, Sabrina's department of climate, it's how is climate change just more than just a stat line? Many people think climate change is warmer atmosphere, and if it's not warm, then climate change isn't happening. That's not necessarily the case at all. Climate change increases the level of extremity with our severe weather events, with our changing seasonal patterns, and it makes the opportunity for a more dangerous, impactful, long-standing, community-changing event to occur, and that can happen on both sides of the coin. I'll quickly go back to Tallahassee, Florida, Sunday, 19 degrees. They're not used to that. There's going to be many people that don't put heaters on. There's many people that live in that state that don't have heaters in their home. There's going to be pipe freezes.
Or
There's
don't
going to
have
be-
homes.
Or don't have homes. Exactly. So that's that. Thank you, Leslie Ann. Thank you all. We still have a little bit. We have like 6 minutes. Let's go. This is great. Let's go with right there, waving at me with the red sweater and vest. Very stylish.
Yeah, this is a series vest. So this is the Coalition for Environmentally Responsible Economies and Societies,
All right.
based right here in Boston. Thank you. So I just have a question. I love maple tree tapping in Massachusetts. I was wondering if anyone has any thoughts on changing maple tree tapping seasons, and will we lose the sugar maple? Maybe these aren't the right questions for meteorologists, but
Leslie Ann said,
thoughts.
uh-oh.
So that sounded like a me question. So one of the things to remember about sugar maples and the importance to the economy and economies across New England is what makes a healthy sugar bush. And drought is not good for sugar bushes. Lack of snowfall, also not good for sugar bushes. Invasive species, also not good for sugar bushes. So when you think about the threats to sugar maples and the threats to the maple industry, they're coming from multiple sides, right? And so we can't just only focus on temperature, snowfall, plants, species, pests, and so on. It's all wrapped in, because you could have a great year that was preceded by a drought, but you had enough snow and the temperatures warmed up just they needed to actually do a good season. So it has to be an all piece and all hazards piece that you're looking at.
Judah.
So I have nothing serious to add on this topic, but I just heard for the first time, I didn't know this existed, exploding trees in Michigan
That's right.
because the moisture inside the sap freezes and it expands and they explode. So
Oh my
That-
gosh. Yeah, that's one step beyond falling iguanas in the southeast in Florida. Okay, next question. My eye line goes right to you, miss, with the gray and white sweater. A microphone will head your way. We can cue the Jeopardy music if you want. All right.
Thank you. So I'm a nurse and I'm as well as a urban planner. And so my question was, how does the meteorologist, in a sense, expect to convey the climate change for the aging population that are here in in the Northeast? I'm originally from Texas, so it's kind of close to the vest. But because there's so many folks that live in housing that's not necessarily equipped to climate change and are getting older, how can meteorologists play a role in the communication style in order for this segment of the population to understand the risks that they are facing?
That's a good question, and I may take that one to lead it off. Essentially, I look as being a conduit of connectivity to anyone that is interested in weather, concerned about the weather, and then the subsequent impacts of climate change, whether if you're 7 years old or if you're 97 years old. I take that role very seriously of making sure the public is aware. And I find every opportunity to connect with any demographic there is in whatever available way that there might be. Sure, am I on TikTok? Yeah. Do I want to be? No. But I have to in order to connect with people to make sure that they are aware and that they are informed, and then they could go about their day with confidence, with at least they know what's happening above their heads. On the flip side of things, I will work with all resources available to me. I've connected with multiple public libraries across the state of Massachusetts. I've connected with colleges, universities, public schools to try to reach people, whether if it's in print, spending time in person. I've even visited folks that live in a 55 plus community, and I've had the best afternoon with them talking all things weather and climate. It's just a matter of understanding your responsibility as a meteorologist and making sure that you take the time to actually just connect with people rather than just putting out a forecast and turning the page. Leslie Ann?
So I'm glad that question was asked, because it's a way for me to remember each state has a state climatologist. And state climatologists have a mandate to actually provide information, outreach, education, research to everybody in their state and beyond. And so if you have not met or reached out to your state climatologist, please remember to do so. Because we can also start building coalitions that allow you to get into places that you may not necessarily think about. So I personally, apart from teaching, I actually give anywhere between 20 and 40 additional talks per year to anybody who asks me, as long as I'm not teaching, because I just love to go out and interact with everybody and share information, but more importantly, listen and learn. Because for me, I show up and I say, hi, my name's Leslie Ann, how can I help you? And then from there, the conversation starts. And so that allows me to actually meet everybody where they are and just have that dialogue so I can share the information that I might happen to have.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think we have time for like maybe 2 more questions before people start yelling at me. And I didn't forget people online. So if we don't get to folks, your questions online, we will get to them again in an article. I'll go 2 more questions. Let's go on this side with black hair and glasses. It's the best I could do. I have glasses.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm curious, you all said that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than most bodies of water. I'm curious if you could shed some light on why. And separately, do you know if municipalities in New England have started reducing snow budgets? Something I was wondering based on recent winters.
So I'll take the first question because the reference that you need for that one is the 4th National Climate Assessment. I was fortunate to be the lead author for that Northeast chapter, and that's where you'll find the first notice of the Gulf of Maine having that particular strong trend in terms of warming, and then it's only been sort of delved into more in the 5th National Climate Assessment. So that's my one plug for you.
Wait, but what's the cause?
What's the what?
So what's causing it though? What are the drivers?
You gotta read it.
I've written about it. I'm just wondering for him. I was trying to get a shortcut for you here.
Nice try, but he already wrote it down. He's gonna read it.
This is the professor right here.
This is great.
You're getting some homework.
I'm signing up for your class. I'm going back to school. Okay.
Oh, and I love that question about budgets. I'm putting that in my brain because that's a good one to look into.
Okay, we have one more question. I'm going to read it from our online submission for each of you. Be quick. Any advice for day-to-day climate anxiety? Can you share anything that makes you feel hopeful, or at least cautiously optimistic, about the future in this area? Any research or movements or trends that you've noticed as well? I'll go right down the line. Leslie, kick us off.
Alrighty. So I get that question a lot, and my answer is always the students in my class, because they are what get me up every single morning. The sophistication of their questions, like literally yesterday, I was blown away. And so that's what keeps me going, because I know that the hope's sitting right in front of me.
Great. Thank you. Sabrina.
I think the answer to anxiety is information. And I am so lucky because as someone who spends all her time thinking about climate change, I can get pretty anxious. But I'm also paid to spend time learning about it and talking to really smart people who can help me understand things. And I think in understanding how many big brains there are working on this problem, that provides me a great amount of relief in knowing that there is, when you step back from the noise of our political moment, there is a vast network of people across the world in the advocacy space, in the policy space, in the science space, in the technology space, you name it space. People are talking about this, working together, reaching across divides, across languages, across geographical distances to work on this. And that is inspiring. And it gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you, Sabrina. Yeah, give it up. Let's go. Judah.
Yeah, trying to keep it. I don't have climate change anxiety necessarily. I think there are a lot of things we don't understand about the climate that, so the uncertainty is so large. I think we don't know exactly what will happen. I don't think we should be playing with fire. This may sound kind of provincial, kind of small-minded, but I was going to say about what the nurse stood up. The climate change impacts the vulnerable disproportionately, at least here in the United States, where we're the richest country in the world. I think if not mitigate, we certainly will adopt. I think, and especially with technology and AI the way it is, I think there's a lot of room for us to, deal with the worst of it. But yeah, hopefully if the young stay enthusiastic and they're the ones that are going to drive innovation, then there's a lot to be hopeful about.
Thank you, Judah. Really appreciate it. I'm going to stop us now. But before we say thank you for everything, I just want to invite Sarah back just one more time to say a few words. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you, each and every one of you. So Ken, Leslie Ann, Sabrina, and Judah, thank you so much for your collective expertise and the insights you gave us on the changing weather, not just here in New England, but across our country. Tonight's event was also made possible with generous support from the Lowell Institute, which allowed the aquarium to offer it free of charge. If you're here with us in person, we invite you to a reception with our panelists in the lobby, which will remain open for about a half hour. And to those of you who joined us virtually this evening, we are so glad that you did. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you, everyone. Leslie Ann, Sabrina, Judah, thank you. Now come ask us questions in person while we all hang out.